The sun bore down mercilessly on Redemption Creek, turning the dusty Main Street into a furnace that seemed to suck the life from everything it touched. The air shimmered with heat, distorting the ramshackle buildings that lined the thoroughfare like broken teeth. It was the kind of day that made men mean and women invisible. The kind of day that reminded everyone why they called this place the edge of nowhere. Clara Whitmore stumbled as the deputy shoved her forward, the heavy shackles around her wrists clanking with each unsteady step. Her once fine calico dress was torn and stained with sweat and dirt, hanging loose on her thin frame. She kept her chin raised despite the weight of the chains, her gray eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the jeering crowd that had gathered to watch her shame. "Move along, murderess," Deputy Jake Thornton growled, his meaty hand pressing between her shoulder blades. "Judge Harlan don't like to be kept waiting." The crowd parted before them like the Red Sea, though not out of respect. Women clutched their shawls tighter and whispered behind gloved hands, while men spat tobacco juice dangerously close to Clara's dusty boots. She recognized some faces. Mrs. Abernathy from the general store, who'd once complimented her needlework. Tom Bradley, the blacksmith who'd fixed her wagon wheel just 2 months ago. Now they looked at her like she was a rabid dog that needed putting down. "Shameful," someone hissed. "A woman killing a man in cold blood. Stole his horse, too," another voice added. "Probably been thieving all along." Clara bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Let them talk. They didn't know the truth. And even if they did, would they care? In a town like Redemption Creek, a woman's word was worth less than the dust beneath their boots. The courthouse loomed ahead, a 2-story wooden structure that was the finest building in town, which wasn't saying much. Its white paint was peeling in the heat, and the American flag hanging from the front porch was so faded it looked more gray than red, white and blue. Judge Harlan insisted on holding court there despite the fact that the roof leaked and the floorboards creaked something awful. It was a matter of civilization, he said, though Clara had learned that civilization in Redemption Creek was just another word for whoever had the most money and guns. As they climbed the steps, Clara caught sight of a man leaning against the porch railing, unlike the townspeople in their Sunday best, come to see justice done. This man wore the practical garb of someone who lived by the gun-worn leather chaps over dark trousers, a dust-colored shirt that had seen better days, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. A Colt .45 rested easy on his hip, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who expected to use it. Colt Harlow watched the procession with the detached interest of a man who'd seen too many prisoners march to their fate. He'd just delivered Black Pete Morrison to the sheriff that morning, collecting a tidy sum of $300 for his trouble. Morrison had put up a fight, but Colt had a reputation for always getting his man, dead or alive, mostly alive, because dead men paid less. But something about this woman made him straighten from his lazy slouch. Maybe it was the way she walked, not with the shuffling gait of the guilty, but with a strange dignity that seemed at odds with her circumstances. Or maybe it was her eyes, gray as a winter storm, that swept over the crowd without flinching. Most folks about to face Judge Harlan's justice had the look of trapped animals. This woman looked like she'd already accepted her fate and found it wanting. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with sweat and righteousness. Every bench was packed with townspeople eager for entertainment. Justice was one of the few free shows in Redemption Creek, and Judge Harlan never disappointed. The judge himself sat behind his elevated bench, a massive man whose black robes couldn't quite hide his substantial belly. His face was red with heat and possibly whiskey, though he'd never admit to the latter. "Bring the accused forward," Judge Harlan boomed, his voice filling the room like thunder. Clara was pushed to stand before the bench. Her court-appointed lawyer, a nervous young man named Timothy Ellis, who'd only been practicing for 6 months, fidgeting beside her. Colt found himself a spot along the back wall where he could see everything. He told himself he was just passing time until the next job came along, but his eyes kept returning to the woman in chains. Clara Whitmore. Judge Harlan read from the papers before him. You stand accused of the theft of one horse, property of Mr. Josiah Brennan, and the murder of said Mr. Brennan at Wilson's Rest Station on the night of August 15th. How do you plead? Timothy Ellis cleared his throat nervously. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. A murmur ran through the crowd. Judge Harlan's eyes narrowed. Is that so? Well then, let's hear from the prosecution. Mr. Aldrich? The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed man from Denver with political ambitions, stood with a dramatic flourish. Your Honor, the evidence against the accused is overwhelming. We have witnesses who saw her at Wilson's Rest Station that night. We have the testimony of Mr. Carl Wilson himself, who found Mr. Brennan's body the next morning. And most damning of all, the accused was captured 3 days later riding Mr. Brennan's distinctive spotted mare. That's a lie. Clara spoke for the first time, her voice carrying despite its quietness. That horse was mine. Josiah Brennan stole her from me. Judge Harlan's gavel came down hard. The accused will remain silent unless addressed directly by this court. Aldrich continued as if she hadn't spoken. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that the accused is a woman of questionable moral character. She arrived in our territory 6 months ago with no family, no husband, and no reasonable explanation for her circumstances. She took up residence at Wilson's Rest Station, working in a capacity that I shall not name in mixed company but which speaks to her character. Colt's jaw tightened. He'd been to Wilson's Rest Station. It wasn't a brothel exactly, but it wasn't exactly respectable either. It was the kind of place where desperate women did what they had to do to survive, and desperate men took advantage of that fact. Your Honor, Timothy Ellis stood on shaking legs. My client was employed as a cook and cleaner at Wilson's Rest Station. Any implications otherwise are merely gossip and conjecture. Sit down, Mr. Ellis. Judge Harlan waved dismissively. I've heard enough, Mrs. Whitmore. Do you have anything to say in your defense before I pronounce sentence? Clara raised her head, and for a moment, her eyes swept the courtroom. They paused on Colt, and he felt something twist in his chest. There was no fear there, no pleading, just a bone-deep weariness and something else, defiance maybe, or just the stubborn refusal to break that he'd seen in wild horses and wounded animals. I did not kill Josiah Brennan, she said clearly. Though God knows he gave me reason enough. That man was a devil who took whatever he wanted from whoever was too weak to stop him. If someone finally gave him what he deserved, it wasn't me. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Harlan's face turned an even deeper shade of red as he pounded his gavel. Order! Order in my courtroom! He leaned forward, his jowls quivering with indignation. Mrs. Whitmore, you stand condemned by your own words. It is the judgment of this court that you are guilty on all charges. You will be held in the town jail until Friday next, at which time you will be hanged by the neck until dead. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court will not. The gavel came down with finality, and the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about the spectacle they'd witnessed. Clara stood still as stone while Deputy Thornton grabbed her arm to lead her away. As she turned, her eyes found Colt's once more. This time he saw something flicker there, not hope exactly, but a challenge, as if she were daring him to look away first. He didn't. As she was marched past him toward the door, Colt moved. It was a small thing, barely noticeable in the press of bodies. He pulled his water flask from his belt and stepped into their path. Deputy, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. Hot day for a walk to the jail. Mind if I give the lady some water? Thornton scowled but shrugged. Make it quick, Harlow, and don't get too close. She's a killer. Remember? Colt held the flask to Clara's lips, letting her drink deeply. The courthouse was emptying around them, people eager to get to the saloon and discuss the morning's entertainment. As she drank, he leaned in close enough to smell the dust and sweat and something else. Lavender, maybe. A ghost of better times. Beg me, he whispered, so low only she could hear. "When they lock that cell door, you think about it. You beg me pretty enough, and I'll break those chains. Get you out of here before Friday comes." Clara's eyes widened slightly, the first real emotion he'd seen from her. She pulled back from the flask, a drop of water glistening on her bottom lip. "Move along," Deputy Thornton barked, shoving between them. As they led her away, Colt stood in the dusty street, watching until they disappeared into the squat building that served as Redemption Creek's jail. The sun was climbing higher, and the heat was becoming unbearable, but he didn't move. Something about Clara Whitmore had hooked into him like a barb, and Colt Harlow had learned long ago to trust his instincts. They'd kept him alive this long, after all, and they were telling him now that there was more to this story than what had been said in that courtroom. The question was whether Clara Whitmore would trust him enough to tell it. He had 5 days to find out. The jail cell was 8 feet by 6 feet of misery, a narrow cot with a straw mattress that smelled of mold and despair, a bucket in the corner that Clara refused to think about, and iron bars that seemed to mock her with their strength. The only light came from a small barred window high on the wall, casting shadows that moved with the sun like a clock counting down her remaining hours. Clara sat on the edge of the cot, her back straight despite the exhaustion that pulled at every muscle. The shackles had been removed, but her wrists bore angry red marks where the iron had bitten into her skin. She rubbed them absently, her mind turning over the bounty hunter's words like a prospector examining fool's gold. "Beg me," he'd said, as if begging had ever gotten her anywhere but deeper into hell. The door to the cell block creaked open, and boot heels rang on the stone floor. She didn't look up, expecting Deputy Thornton with whatever passed for supper in this place. Instead, Colt Harlow appeared at her cell door, hat in hand, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of good whiskey. "Evening, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, as casual as if they were meeting at a church social. Clara finally looked up, studying him with the wariness of someone who'd learned that kindness usually came with a price. "It's Miss Whitmore, and I don't recall inviting you to call." "No, ma'am, you didn't." Colt pulled a 3-legged stool from the corner and sat down just outside her cell, keeping a respectful distance. "But I figured you might be hungry." He produced a bundle wrapped in brown paper from inside his coat. "Sally over at the boarding house makes a decent beef stew. Thought you might prefer it to whatever slop Thornton's planning to serve." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing not just stew, but fresh bread and even a small apple. The smell made Clara's stomach clench with hunger she hadn't let herself feel. Pride warred with need for a long moment before practicality won. She moved to the bars and accepted the food with a quiet, "Thank you." They sat in silence while she ate, Colt seeming content to wait. When she'd finished every bite and wrapped the apple in her skirt pocket for later, he finally spoke. "I've been asking around about Josiah Brennan," he said conversationally. "Interesting fellow. Owned 3 businesses in Denver before he came out here. Lost them all to debts. Apparently, gambling debts, specifically." Clara's hands stilled in her lap. "Is that so?" "Mm-hmm. Also heard he had a real temper when he drank," which was most nights. "According to the fellows at the Broken Wheel Saloon, beat a working girl half to death in Cheyenne 2 years back. Her employer decided not to press charges after Brennan made a generous donation to his establishment." "Money talks," Clara said bitterly. "It's the only language men like him understand." Colt leaned back, studying her face in the dim light. "You want to tell me what really happened that night?" Clara laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Why? So you can decide if I'm worth saving? I told you, Mr. Harlow, I don't beg. Not anymore. I ain't asking you to. I'm asking for the truth." She was quiet for so long, Colt thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so soft he had to lean forward to hear, she began to speak. "I was married once, 5 years ago, back in Kansas. Henry Whitmore was his name. My parents thought he was a good match, owned a small farm, went to church regular, didn't drink over much. What they didn't know was that he had debts. Bad ones. The kind of debts that come with men who break your fingers if you don't pay. Clara's hand went unconsciously to her left hand, where Colt could now see two fingers that hadn't healed quite straight. When the money ran out, Henry found another way to pay. He sold me. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Colt's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened on his hat brim. Not outright, you understand. Clara continued, her voice steady as if she were telling someone else's story. That would be illegal. No, he just agreed that I would work at a certain establishment to pay off his debts. Cooking and cleaning. He said, when I refused, he beat me unconscious and delivered me there himself. Told them I was touched in the head, prone to wild stories. Told them to keep me locked up for my own good. Wilson's rest station, Colt said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. Carl Wilson ran it like his own private kingdom? The law didn't reach that far into the territory. And even if it did, who'd believe a woman over a respected businessman? I did what I had to do to survive, Mr. Harlow. I ain't proud of it, but I ain't ashamed neither. Shame's a luxury I couldn't afford. How long? 2 years. The words came out flat, emotionless. 2 years before I saw my chance. There was a fire in the kitchen one night. Grease got too hot. In the confusion, I ran, stole a horse from the stable and rode until she couldn't run anymore. That was 6 months ago. But you came back. A ghost of a smile touched Clara's lips. Didn't have much choice. The mare went lame 50 miles out. I was on foot. No food, no water. In country I didn't know. Would have died out there if an old prospector hadn't found me. Tom Garrett, his name was. Crazy as a bedbug, but kind as they come. He nursed me back to health, gave me his old pack horse. That spotted mare they say I stole. And Brennan? Clara's expression hardened. Showed up at Wilson's 3 weeks ago. Recognized me right off. Though I'd cut my hair and changed my name. Said he'd been looking for me on behalf of my dear husband, who was worried sick about his poor touched wife. Said he'd take me back to Kansas for a finder's fee. But he didn't. No. Carl Wilson convinced him there was more money to be made keeping me there. They worked out an arrangement. Brennan would be a special customer. In exchange, he wouldn't report me as a runaway wife. Clara's voice had gone cold as winter frost. That night, the night he died, he came to my room, drunk as a lord and mean with it. Said he was tired of Wilson's rules, tired of being gentle. Said he'd paid good money and wanted his money's worth. She stopped. Her hands clenched so tight her knuckles showed white. Colt waited, patient as a hunter. I fought him, she whispered. Fought like a wildcat, scratched his face, bit his hand near through. He hit me with a bottle, knocked me half senseless. When I came to, he was on top of me, heavy as a boulder. But he wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. There was blood on the floor, on the walls. Someone had caved in his skull with the iron poker from the fireplace. Someone? Clara met his eyes directly. I don't know who. I swear on my mother's grave. I don't know. I was too scared to scream, too scared to move. Then I heard footsteps in the hall. I knew whoever found me there would hang me for certain. So I ran, took the mare, my mare, whatever they say, and ran. Made it 3 days before the posse caught up. Colt was quiet for a long moment, turning her story over in his mind. He'd tracked enough liars to know what they sounded like. And Clara Whitmore wasn't lying. Might not be telling everything, but what she'd said was truth. You could have said all this at the trial, he pointed out. Clara laughed again, that bitter sound. A runaway wife who sold herself at a way station? Who'd believe me over Carl Wilson's word? Besides, Mr. Harlow, men like Judge Harlan don't want truth. They want someone to blame, and I make an easy target. So you're just going to let them hang you? What choice do I have? Clara stood, pacing the small cell like a caged cat. Even if I ran, where would I go? I've got no money, no family, no friends, just the clothes on my back and a death sentence following me wherever I go. Colt stood too, moving close to the bars. You'd have me. Clara stopped pacing, turning to face him with surprise written on her features. Why? Why would you risk your neck for a woman you don't even know? Maybe because I've been where you are, Colt said quietly. different circumstances. But I know what it's like to be condemned for something that wasn't your fault. Know what it's like to have everyone assume the worst because it's easier than looking for the truth." They stood there, separated by iron bars but connected by something neither quite understood. Finally, Clara moved closer, close enough that Colt could see the gold flecks in her gray eyes. "Your offer," she said softly, "to break me out. You meant it?" "I did, still do. And what's your price, Mr. Harlow? Because men like you always have a price." Colt considered lying, making up some story about money or bounty. But something about this woman demanded honesty. The truth. All of it. No lies. No holding back. "You ride with me. You trust me with everything. And when we find out who really killed Brennan, because we will find out, you let me help you clear your name. And if we can't, if the truth doesn't matter, then we keep riding until we find somewhere it does." Clara searched his face for a long moment, looking for the trap, the lie, the thing that would destroy her. All she found was steady brown eyes and a jaw set with determination. "3 nights from now," she said finally. "That's when Thornton gets drunk at the saloon. Never fails after a hanging's been announced. He'll leave his nephew Billy to watch the jail, and Billy's about as useful as a screen door in a stampede." Colt nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. 3 nights it is. Be ready." He turned to go, then paused. "Clara, that thing you said about begging once before and it only bringing you pain? I'm sorry for that, but just so you know, you won't ever have to beg me for nothing. My word on it." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with the shadows and, for the first time in longer than she could remember, something that might have been hope. The third night came wrapped in clouds that blocked out the stars, turning the world into a canvas of black ink. Colt waited in the alley beside the jail, pressed against the rough wooden wall, listening to the sounds of Redemption Creek settling into its nighttime rhythms. From the Broken Wheel Saloon came the tinny sound of a piano and the occasional burst of drunken laughter. Deputy Thornton would be in there, well into his cups by now, regaling anyone who'd listen with stories about the upcoming hanging. Billy Thornton, all of 19 and soft as fresh butter, sat in the sheriff's office reading a dime novel by lamplight. Colt could see him through the window, lips moving as he struggled with the bigger words. The boy had a scattergun across his lap, but Colt knew it wasn't loaded. Billy was scared of guns, a fact his uncle tried hard to hide, moving silent as smoke. Colt circled to the back of the building where a narrow window opened into the storage room. He'd spent the last 2 nights mapping every inch of the jail, learning its weaknesses. The window had a simple latch that gave way under his knife blade with barely a whisper. Inside, he navigated by feel through boxes of confiscated goods and old wanted posters until he reached the door to the cell block. The keys hung on a peg just inside the sheriff's office, but that would mean dealing with Billy instead. Colt produced a set of lockpicks from his vest, tools of a trade he'd learned in harder times. The lock was old, more rust than metal, and it gave way after a moment's coaxing. The door swung open on hinges he'd oiled the night before during a friendly visit to Deputy Thornton, who'd been too busy bragging about his important prisoner to notice Colt's ministrations. Clara stood at her cell door, dressed in the men's clothing he'd smuggled to her the day before: canvas trousers, a dark shirt, and boots that actually fit. Her hair was tucked up under a worn hat, and in the darkness, she could pass for a young ranch hand. "You came," she whispered. "Said I would." Colt made quick work of the cell lock. "We need to move fast. Storm's coming in from the north. It'll cover our tracks, but we need to be well away before it hits." As Clara stepped out of the cell, Colt caught her arm. "Wait." He produced a gun belt from beneath his duster, complete with a Colt .38. "You know how to use this?" Clara took the weapon, checking the cylinder with practiced movements that answered his question. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12. Said a woman alone needed to know how to protect herself." Her mouth twisted bitterly. "Lot of good it did me. It might yet. Come on." They slipped through the jail like shadows, but as they reached the storage room, Footsteps echoed from the office. Billy was making his rounds, early for once in his life. "Down," Colt hissed, pulling Clara behind a stack of crates. The door opened, lamplight spilling in. Billy stood in the doorway, squinting into the darkness. "Hello? Someone there?" Colt's hand moved to his gun, but Clara caught his wrist, shaking her head. Instead, she picked up a small stone from the floor and tossed it into the far corner. It clattered against some metal buckets, and Billy, predictably, moved toward the sound. "Probably them damn rats again," the boy muttered, stepping fully into the room. Colt moved fast, bringing the butt of his pistol down on the back of Billy's head. The boy dropped like a sack of grain, the lamp falling from his hand. Clara caught it before it could shatter and set it carefully aside. "Is he just sleeping?" Colt assured her, already dragging Billy behind the crates. "He'll have a powerful headache come morning, but nothing permanent. Boy's not bad, just young and stupid." They climbed through the window into the alley where Colt had 2 horses waiting, his own big bay gelding and a sturdy paint mare he'd bought that afternoon. "Can you ride?" he asked as Clara swung into the saddle with an ease that answered him before she could speak. "Better than most," she said, gathering the reins. "Where are we heading?" "North first, toward the mountains. There's a box canyon about 15 miles out where we can rest. After that," he mounted his own horse and turned to look at her. "After that, we'll see what the morning brings." They walked the horses through town, keeping to the back alleys and shadows. Every dog bark made Clara tense. Every shadow could be someone ready to raise the alarm. But Redemption Creek slept on, unaware that its prized prisoner was slipping away like smoke through their fingers. Once they hit the edge of town, Colt nudged his horse into a trot, then a canter. Clara matched him stride for stride, and soon they were flying across the desert, the wind whipping past their faces and the sound of hoofbeats drowning out everything else. They rode hard for 2 hours, following trails Colt knew from years of hunting men through this unforgiving country. The promised storm was building, the wind picking up and carrying the smell of rain. Lightning flickered on the horizon, illuminating the landscape in brief, stark moments. "There," Colt called over the wind, pointing to a break in the rocky hills ahead. The canyon. They pushed through a narrow opening between 2 towering rocks, and suddenly the wind dropped to nothing. The canyon was small but sheltered, with high walls that would hide them from any pursuit. A trickle of water ran down one wall, feeding a small pool at the base. "We'll rest here until the storm passes," Colt said, dismounting and immediately seeing to the horses. "There's an overhang further in that'll keep us dry." Clara slid from her saddle, her legs shaking slightly from the hard ride. She hadn't been on a horse in months, and every muscle protested, but she was free. The simple fact of it hit her like a physical blow, and she had to grab the saddle to steady herself. "You all right?" Colt asked, concern coloring his voice. Clara took a deep breath. "I can't quite believe it. That I'm out. That you actually came." "Told you I would." Colt finished with the horses and turned to face her. In the darkness, she could barely make out his features, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze. "I keep my promises. Clara, always." The first fat raindrops began to fall, and they hurried to the overhang, a natural cave carved by centuries of wind and water. Colt had obviously used this place before. There was dry wood stacked against the back wall and a circle of stones for a fire pit. Soon they had a small fire going, the smoke disappearing up through a crack in the rock ceiling. The storm hit in earnest, turning the world outside their shelter into a chaos of water and wind. But inside, it was warm and dry and safe. Clara sat close to the fire, holding her hands out to the flames. Now that the immediate danger was past, reaction was setting in. Her hands trembled, and she couldn't seem to get warm despite the fire's heat. Colt noticed, of course. He dug into his saddlebags and produced a bottle of whiskey. "Medicine," he said, offering it to her. "Take the edge off." Clara took a small sip, the liquor burning a path down her throat and pooling warm in her belly. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why are you doing this? Really?" Colt was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "You ever hear of the Mason County War?" Clara shook her head. "Texas Range War. About 5 years back. I was young, full of piss and vinegar, thought I knew everything. Got caught up on the wrong side of things, not because I believed in the cause, but because they paid well and I needed the money." He took a pull from the bottle himself. "Ended up framed for killing a ranger. Spent 3 months running, knowing I was innocent but unable to prove it. Finally caught the real killer. Cleared my name. But those 3 months," he trailed off, lost in memory. "They change you," Clara finished softly. "Being hunted, being assumed guilty, it changes who you are." "It does." Colt looked at her then, really looked at her. "When I saw you in that courtroom, saw that look in your eyes, I recognized it. That was me 5 years ago, and I decided maybe I could keep someone else from going through what I did. And if I'd actually killed him..." Colt shrugged. "From what I've learned about Josiah Brennan, the world's better off without him. But my gut says you didn't. My gut's rarely wrong." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Clara found herself studying Colt in the firelight, the way the shadows played across his face, the steadiness of his hands, the quiet confidence in every movement. She'd known many men in her life, most of them cruel or weak or both. Colt Harlow seemed to be neither. "So what now?" she asked eventually. "We can't run forever." "No, but we can run long enough." Colt pulled a map from his pocket, spreading it on the ground between them. "I know a man in Colorado. Judge who actually cares about justice. If we can find proof about who really killed Brennan, he'll give you a fair hearing." "And how do we find this proof?" "By going back to where it started." Colt's finger traced a path on the map. "Wilson's rest station. Someone there knows what really happened that night. We just need to find out who." Clara's breath caught. "I can't go back there. I can't." "You won't be alone." Colt's voice was firm. "I'll be with you every step. But Clara, it's the only way. We find the truth, or you spend the rest of your life running." She knew he was right. The thought of returning to that place made her skin crawl. But what choice did she have? At least this time, she wouldn't be facing it alone. "All right," she said quietly. "But not yet. Let me be free for just a little while first. Let me remember who I was before all this. We've got time." Colt added more wood to the fire. "Get some sleep. I'll keep watch." Clara curled up near the fire, using her saddle as a pillow. Despite everything, the hard ground, the danger still pursuing them, the uncertain future, she felt safer than she had in years. As sleep began to claim her, she heard Colt's voice, soft as the rainfall outside. "No one's gonna hurt you again, Clara, not while I'm breathing. That's a promise." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Whitmore believed it. The desert stretched before them like a vast ocean of sand and sage, broken only by towering rock formations that rose like ancient sentinels against the blazing sky. They'd been riding for 3 days since leaving the canyon, keeping to little-known trails and waterholes that Colt knew from years of tracking outlaws through this unforgiving land. Clara had shed the last vestiges of the frightened prisoner. Under the harsh sun, her skin had taken on a golden hue, and her gray eyes held a clarity that hadn't been there before. She rode with natural grace, adapting to the rhythms of the trail like she'd been born to it. But Colt noticed the way she still startled at sudden sounds, the way her hand would drift to the pistol at her hip when they heard hoofbeats in the distance. "There." Colt pointed to a line of cottonwoods in the distance, their green leaves a promise of water. "We'll rest through the heat of the day." They made camp in the shade, the horses grateful for the grass and the small stream that bubbled between the trees. Clara knelt by the water, splashing her face and neck, letting the coolness wash away the trail dust. When she looked up, she caught Colt watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing, Just, you look different. Alive. Clara's laugh was rueful. Prison has a way of draining the life out of a person. Even 3 days in that cell felt like 3 years. It wasn't just the jail, Colt said quietly. You've been in a cage a lot longer than that. She didn't deny it. Instead, she moved to sit beside him in the shade, their shoulders almost touching. The intimacy of it should have frightened her, after everything she'd endured. The thought of being close to any man should have sent her running. But Colt was different. He'd had a dozen chances to take advantage, to demand payment for his help, and he'd done nothing but keep his distance and his word. Tell me about before, she said suddenly. Before you became a bounty hunter. What were you? Colt plucked a blade of grass, rolling it between his fingers. Son of a farmer, if you can believe it. Little place in Missouri. Had 3 sisters who tried to civilize me and a mother who prayed I'd become a preacher. What happened? War happened. I was 16 when it started. Thought it would be a grand adventure. By the time it ended, I'd seen enough killing to last 10 lifetimes. Couldn't go back to farming after that. Hands that had held a rifle couldn't seem to manage a plow. Clara understood. War had a way of changing people, even those who never saw a battlefield. So, you came west. So, I came west. Figured I might as well use the skills the Union Army gave me. Tracking, shooting, surviving. Started out as a scout for the cavalry. Then found there was better money in bounty hunting. He glanced at her. What about you? Before the marriage? Daughter of a schoolteacher, Clara said, surprising herself with the willingness to share. Mama died when I was young, so it was just Papa and me. He taught me everything, reading, writing, arithmetic, but also how to shoot, how to judge a man's character, how to stand up for myself. He would have hated what I became. A survivor. Colt shook his head. I doubt that. Fathers want their daughters to be safe, but they also want them to be strong. You're both. They fell into comfortable silence, the heat of the day settling over them like a blanket. Clara found herself studying Colt's profile, the strong jaw shadowed with stubble, the lines around his eyes that spoke of too many hours squinting into the sun. He wasn't handsome in the classical sense, but there was something about him that drew her eye again and again. We should move on, Colt said eventually, though he made no move to get up. Want to make Devil's Canyon by nightfall. There's a trading post there where we can resupply without too many questions. As they saddled the horses, Clara's paint mare suddenly shied, ears flat against her head. Colt's bay snorted and pawed the ground. Then they heard it, the distant drumbeat of hooves, many of them, coming fast. Posse, Colt said grimly, already swinging into the saddle. They're following the main trail, but they'll see our tracks where we turned off. Ride! They spurred their horses into a gallop, heading deeper into the Badlands where the terrain would favor those who knew it over those who didn't. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Clara risked a glance back and saw a dust cloud rising like smoke from a wildfire. This way! Colt veered sharply left, heading for a narrow crack in the red rock cliffs. Stay close. They plunged into the canyon, the walls so tight their stirrups scraped against stone. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes opening into wider spaces before narrowing again. Their horses' hooves echoed like thunder in the confined space. Behind them, shouts indicated the posse had found the entrance. But many of them balked at the narrow passage, and those who followed found themselves strung out in a line, unable to use their numbers to advantage. The canyon opened suddenly into a bowl-shaped valley dotted with massive boulders. Colt didn't slow, weaving between the rocks with Clara close behind. Shots rang out as the first pursuers emerged from the canyon, but the bullets whined harmlessly off stone. There! Colt pointed to another opening on the far side of the valley. Once we're through there, we can lose them in the maze. But as they neared the opening, 2 riders appeared, blocking their path. Clara recognized one immediately. Carl Wilson himself, his face twisted with rage. End of the line! Whore! Wilson shouted, raising his rifle. Everything happened in an instant. Colt drew and fired in one smooth motion, his bullet catching Wilson's companion in the shoulder and spinning him from the saddle. Clara's paint mare, trained for cattle work, spun on her haunches as Clara brought her own pistol to bear. Time seemed to slow. She saw Wilson's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the muzzle swing toward her. No fear this time, only cold certainty. She fired once, twice, the .38 bucking in her hand. Wilson's rifle shot went wide as he clutched his chest, a look of complete surprise on his face before he toppled backward. "Ride!" Colt shouted, but Clara was already spurring her horse forward, leaping over Wilson's body and into the passage beyond. They rode hard for another hour, using every trick Colt knew to confuse their trail. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they pulled up in a grove of juniper trees, horses lathered and blowing. "Are you hurt?" Colt asked, his hands running over Clara's arms and shoulders, checking for injury. "I'm fine," she gasped, still trying to catch her breath. "Is he... did I..." "He's dead," Colt confirmed. "It was a clean shot. Him or you. Clara, you made the right choice." Clara slid from her saddle, her legs shaky. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her cold despite the heat. She'd killed a man. The fact that it was Carl Wilson, who had tormented her for 2 years, who had sold her body to any man with coin, who would have dragged her back to that hell, none of that seemed to matter in the moment. She had taken a life. "Hey!" Colt was beside her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his, seeing understanding there, and something else, something that made her heart beat faster for entirely different reasons. "You did what you had to do," he said softly. "Wilson was a rabid dog who needed putting down. You gave him more mercy than he ever showed you or any other woman who crossed his path." "I know," Clara whispered. "It's just, I thought I'd feel different. Guilty, maybe, or satisfied. But I just feel empty." Colt pulled her against him, and she let him, resting her forehead against his chest. He smelled of leather and gunpowder and sage, and his arms around her felt like the safest place in the world. "The first kill always feels that way," he murmured into her hair. "Empty, like something inside you broke that can't be fixed. But it gets easier, not better, but easier." They stood that way for a long moment, the world reduced to the circle of his arms and the steady beat of his heart. Then Clara pulled back, looking up at him with eyes that held new shadows, but also new strength. "What now?" she asked. "Now we disappear," Colt said. "Wilson's dead, which means the one person who could identify you for certain is gone. The posse will report that, and with him gone, the case against you gets a lot weaker. We lay low for a while, let things settle, then we start working on clearing your name properly. And in the meantime," Colt smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "In the meantime, we live, we ride, we survive, we watch each other's backs. We be free." As they remounted and rode on through the gathering dusk, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. The cage she'd carried for so long was finally, truly broken. She was a fugitive, yes, but she was also free. And she wasn't alone, beside her. Colt rode steady and sure, his presence a promise of protection and something more, something that scared her almost as much as any posse or hangman's noose, because Clara Whitmore, who had sworn never to trust another man, never to let another close enough to hurt her, was beginning to realize that she was falling for the bounty hunter who had set her free. The desert stretched endlessly before them, dangerous and beautiful and full of possibilities. And for the first time in years, Clara found herself looking forward to tomorrow. Dawn broke over the salt flats like a revelation, painting the crystalline surface in shades of rose and gold. Colt woke to find Clara gone, her bedroll neatly folded, her horse missing from where they'd picketed the animals. For a moment, panic clawed at his chest. Had she been taken? Had the posse found them in the night? Then he saw her footprints leading away from camp. saw where she'd saddled her mare with careful, quiet movements. She'd left voluntarily. Colt cursed under his breath, already throwing his saddle onto his bay. He knew why she'd gone. Could read it in the careful way she'd avoided his eyes last night, in the distance she'd kept between their bedrolls, after what had happened in the grove. After that moment of closeness, she'd gotten scared. Not of him, but of what was growing between them. The tracks led north across the flats, clear as words on a page. She had maybe an hour's head start, but she wasn't trying to hide her trail. Part of her wanted to be found. He realized. Part of her was testing him, seeing if he'd keep his promise to stay by her side. The sun climbed higher, turning the salt flats into a glaring white expanse that hurt to look at. Mirages shimmered in the distance, making it hard to distinguish real from illusion. But there, a dark speck moving slowly across the blinding surface. Clara. He caught up to her where the flats gave way to broken ground, her mare picking carefully through the cracked earth. She heard him coming but didn't turn, didn't stop. "Running from me now," Colt called, pulling alongside her. "Not running," Clara said, her voice carefully neutral. "Just needed to think." "About?" She finally looked at him, and he saw the war in her eyes. "About how I swore I'd never let another man close enough to hurt me. About how you're making me break that promise." Colt reached out, caught her horse's reins, bringing both animals to a stop. "Clara, no." She held up a hand. "Let me finish. I woke up this morning and realized I was happy. Actually happy. And that terrified me more than any posse or noose ever could. Because happiness means you have something to lose. So you thought you'd leave before you could lose it? I thought..." Clara's voice broke slightly. "I thought it would be easier. For both of us. You don't need a woman with my past dragging you down. Colt, you could ride away right now. Go back to your life. Collect bounties on men who actually deserve it. Find yourself a good woman who doesn't have blood on her hands and ghosts in her bed." Colt dismounted, coming around to stand by her stirrup. "Look at me," he said softly. When she did, he saw tears she was too proud to let fall. "I could have ridden away 3 days ago," he said. "Could have left you in that jail, collected my pay for Black Pete Morrison, and been halfway to Colorado by now. Know why I didn't?" Clara shook her head. "Because the moment I saw you in that courthouse, something inside me recognized something inside you. Like calling to we're both broken. Clara. Both carrying weight that won't ever fully lift. But maybe that's why this works. Maybe that's why I can't imagine riding away from you now. I'll hurt you," she whispered. "Everyone I've ever cared about. I've brought them pain. My father died trying to find me after I disappeared. My husband, your husband was a bastard who sold you like cattle." Colt interrupted firmly. "That's on him, not you. And your father, he died loving his daughter. There's worse ways to go." Clara closed her eyes, and one tear escaped, tracking down her dusty cheek. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "How to trust, how to feel again. Then we'll figure it out together." Colt held up his hand to help her down. "But Clara, you've got to stop running. From me, from this, from yourself." "I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to go. And maybe not even then." She looked at his offered hand for a long moment, then took it, letting him help her from the saddle. Her feet had barely touched ground when she suddenly pressed herself against him, her face buried in his shoulder. "I'm scared," she said, the words muffled against his shirt. "I know." His arms came around her, holding her close. "So am I, but we're scared together." They stood there in the growing heat, two damaged souls finding solace in each other's arms. Finally, Clara pulled back, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I'm not good at needing people," she said. "Lucky for you, I'm persistent." Colt smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "Now, how about we find some shade and water before these horses decide to leave us both behind?" They rode on together, the moment of crisis past, but leaving something new in its wake. The understanding. A commitment unspoken, but real as the desert around them. By midday, They'd found shelter in a cluster of wind-carved rocks that provided shade and concealment. A small seep of water had created a pocket of green in the harsh landscape grass for the horses, and even a few stunted cottonwoods. As they made camp, Clara seemed to come to a decision. She moved with new purpose, unsaddling her mare with efficient movements, then surprising Colt by laying out her bedroll right next to his instead of maintaining her usual careful distance. "Clara?" he asked, uncertain. She turned to face him, her gray eyes clear and determined. "I'm done being afraid," she said simply. "Of you, of this, of whatever's happening between us. I've spent 2 years living in fear. I won't do it anymore." That night, as the stars emerged in the vast desert sky, they sat close by their small fire. Clara had shed her jacket in the warmth, and Colt could see the graceful line of her throat, the determined set of her shoulders. She was beautiful, he realized, not in the conventional sense, but in the way of wild things that had survived against all odds. "Tell me something good," Clara said suddenly. "Something that has nothing to do with death or running or the past." Colt thought for a moment. "When I was 8, my sister Sarah taught me to dance. Said every gentleman should know how to properly escort a lady through a waltz. We practiced in the barn, using the milk cows as our audience." Clara's laugh was like water in the desert. "Did the cows appreciate your footwork?" "They were very polite about it, though old Bessie did moo at all the wrong moments." He stood, offering his hand with exaggerated formality. "May I have this dance, Miss Whitmore?" "There's no music," she protested, but she was already rising, taking his hand. "Sure there is." He drew her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. "Listen." And there was music, of a sort. The crackle of the fire, the distant call of a night bird, the whisper of wind through stone. They moved together slowly, finding their rhythm, and Clara discovered that Colt's sister had taught him well. "I haven't danced since," she started, then stopped. "Since before." Colt finished. "I know, but that was then. This is now." She looked up at him, studying his face in the firelight. "What are we doing, Colt? Really?" "Dancing," he said simply. "Living, being human together. Isn't that enough? It's everything," she whispered. The dance slowed, stopped, but they didn't move apart. Clara's hand came up to touch his face, fingers tracing the line of a scar on his cheek. "How did you get this?" "Knife fight in Amarillo. Man thought I was cheating at cards." "Were you?" "No, I'm terrible at cards. Can't bluff to save my life." She smiled at that. "An honest bounty hunter. What are the odds?" "About as good as finding an innocent woman in a jail cell, I'd reckon." The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Then Clara rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and achingly tentative. It was nothing like the desperate heat of their first kiss in the cave. This was a choice, made with clear eyes and steady hands. When they parted, Colt saw wonder in her eyes, as if she'd discovered something she'd thought lost forever. "I thought I'd forgotten how to feel this," she said softly. "Feel what?" "Safe, wanted, like I'm more than just a survivor." "You are more," Colt said firmly. "So much more." They settled by the fire again. Clara curled against his side, his arm around her shoulders. It was still too new, too fragile to push further. But this was enough. This closeness, this sharing of warmth and silence and the vast desert night. "Tomorrow we need to keep moving," Colt said eventually. "There's a town about 2 days' ride from here. Telegraph office there. I want to wire that judge I told you about. Start working on getting you a proper hearing. And if he says no, then we keep going until we find one who says yes. Mexico's not that far if we need it to be." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I don't want to run forever. Colt, I want—" She paused, searching for words. "I want what we had tonight. Dancing by a fire, sleeping without fear. A future that's more than just staying one step ahead of the past. Then that's what we'll build." Colt promised. Together. As the fire burned low and the desert cooled around them, they held each other. Two souls finding their way back from darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, but tonight, under the endless stars, They had found something worth fighting for, something worth the risk of hope. And in the morning, when Colt woke to find Clara still there, her hand clasped in his even in sleep, he knew she had finally stopped running. The attack came at dawn, swift and brutal as a rattlesnake's strike. Colt woke to the sound of rifles being cocked, his hand moving instinctively for his gun only to freeze as a voice cut through the morning air. "Move and you're dead. Harlow." 4 men stood at the edge of their camp, weapons trained on them. Not a typical posse. These were professionals, bounty hunters like himself. Colt recognized one, Wade Garrison, a man with a reputation for bringing in his quarry dead more often than alive. "Wade," Colt said carefully, not moving from where he lay. "Didn't know you were working this territory?" "Lot of things you don't know," Garrison replied, his scarred face impassive. "Like how the price on your lady friend there just went up to $5,000? Carl Wilson had friends, rich friends. They want her bad." Beside him, Clara had gone very still, her hand inches from her pistol but not daring to reach for it. "She's innocent," Colt said. Garrison shrugged. "Ain't my job to decide that. My job's to bring her in. Question is, are you gonna make this difficult? You know me better than that." "Wade." "I do, which is why I'm wondering what's got into you. Throwing away your reputation for some woman." Garrison's eyes narrowed. "Unless... Well, hell, don't tell me Colt Harlow's gone and got himself sweet on a fugitive." One of the other men chuckled. "Seems like she must be something special in the bedroll. Boys." The words had barely left his mouth when Clara moved, not for her gun, but grabbing a handful of hot coals from the edge of the fire and flinging them at the nearest gunman. The man screamed, dropping his rifle to claw at his burning face. Colt rolled left, drawing and firing in one motion. His bullet caught another man in the shoulder, spinning him around. Clara had her gun out now, firing as she scrambled for cover behind a boulder. Garrison dove behind a fallen log, cursing. "Damn it, I wanted to do this peaceable." "Nothing peaceable about a lynching," Colt called back, pressing himself against a rock as bullets chipped stone near his head. The firefight was fierce but brief. The bounty hunters had expected surprise to carry the day, hadn't counted on Clara's quick thinking or Colt's speed. When the gun smoke cleared, one man was dead, another clutching his burned face and moaning, the third bleeding from his shoulder. Garrison emerged from cover, hands raised but his eyes still dangerous. "This ain't over. Harlow, you just made yourself a fugitive too. There'll be more coming." "Let them come," Colt said, keeping his gun trained on the other man. "Now drop your weapons and start walking. Take your wounded and get out of here." "You're making a mistake," Garrison said as he complied. "That woman's gonna be the death of you." "Maybe, but it'll be my choice." They watched the bounty hunters leave, Garrison supporting one wounded man while the other stumbled along beside them. Only when they were out of sight did Colt lower his weapon. "We need to move," he said, already starting to break camp. "They'll be back with more men." Clara stood frozen, staring at the dead man. "I started this," she said quietly. "That man's dead because of me. That man's dead because he chose to hunt people for money," Colt corrected. "Because he thought you'd be easy prey. You defended yourself. It's not getting easier," she said, her voice hollow. "The killing, you said it would get easier." Colt paused in his packing to look at her. "I said it would get easier to live with, not easier to do. The day killing becomes easy is the day you lose your soul." They rode hard through the morning, pushing the horses to their limits. The landscape changed around them, red rock giving way to scrubland and then to the edges of pine forest as they climbed into higher country. By noon, Colt's bay was limping. He dismounted, checking the horse's hooves, and cursed at what he found. "Stone bruise," he said. "Bad one. He needs rest." "We can't stop," Clara said, scanning the horizon nervously. "They're coming." "I know." Colt looked around, then pointed to a narrow trail leading up into the rocks. "There, natural fortification. We'll make our stand there." Our stand? Clara's voice was sharp with fear and anger. Colt, you should go. Take my horse. Ride hard. Get away from this. From me. We've had this conversation, he said, already leading his limping horse up the trail. That was before you became a wanted man, too. She dismounted, grabbing his arm. Don't you understand? I've ruined you, your reputation, your livelihood. Everything you built is gone because of me. Colt turned to face her fully, his expression fierce. Everything I built was just existing, going through the motions, living without really being alive. He cupped her face in his hands. You didn't ruin me. Clara, you saved me, gave me something worth fighting for besides the next bounty. I'm not worth dying for, she whispered. That's where you're wrong. He kissed her, quick and hard. Now help me find a defensive position. If we're going to have visitors, let's make sure we're ready. They found a good spot among the rocks, high ground with clear sight lines and natural cover. Colt positioned their rifles, checked ammunition, filled canteens from a small spring. Clara watched him work with military precision, seeing new facets of the man who'd become her salvation. You were more than just a soldier in the war, she observed. You were an officer. Colt glanced at her, surprised by her perception. Captain led a unit of sharpshooters, specialists in what they called irregular warfare. Is that what this is? Close enough. They settled in to wait, the afternoon sun beating down on the rocks. Clara found herself studying Colt's profile as he kept watch, memorizing the lines of his face. If these were to be their last hours, she wanted to remember everything. Talk to me, she said suddenly. Tell me what you want. If we get out of this, if we make it to that judge, if I'm cleared, what then? Colt was quiet for a moment. Ranch, he said finally. Nothing big, maybe 100 head of cattle, some horses. Place with good water and grass, mountains in the distance but not too close. He glanced at her. What about you? I used to dream about a little shop. Clara admitted. Dress goods and notions, somewhere back east where no one would know me. But now... She shook her head. I can't see myself in a shop anymore. Can't see myself anywhere that doesn't have sky and wind and room to run. The West does that to you. Colt agreed. Gets in your blood. It's not just the West, Clara said softly. Before Colt could respond, dust appeared on the horizon. Not one cloud but three, converging from different directions. Smart, Colt muttered. They're coming at us from multiple angles. He handed Clara extra ammunition. Remember what I taught you. Breathe steady, squeeze, don't pull, and don't waste shots on anything outside effective range. Colt? Clara's voice was steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. If we don't make it, we'll make it. But if we don't, I need you to know. She took a breath. These past days with you have been worth everything. The running, the fear, all of it. I'd do it again just for the chance to know you. Clara, I think I love you, she said in a rush. I know it's too soon and too crazy and all kinds of wrong, but I needed to say it, in case. Colt pulled her close, kissing her deeply. It's not too soon, he said against her lips. Not too crazy. And Clara, I love you too. Have since the moment you looked at me in that courtroom and dared me to look away. The first riders appeared, tiny figures growing larger as they approached. Clara counted at least a dozen men, maybe more. That's a lot of guns for one woman, she said, trying for lightness. Just means you're worth it, Colt replied, checking his rifle one more time. Ready? Clara took position behind her chosen boulder, rifle steady in her hands. Ready. The riders came on, spreading out as they approached the rocks. Colt recognized Garrison in the lead, and his heart sank. Wade wasn't the type to give up, and he wasn't the type to make the same mistake twice. Harlow! Garrison's voice carried clearly across the distance. Last chance. Send the woman out, and you can ride away. No one has to die today. Counteroffer. Colt called back. You turn around and forget you ever saw us. Because if you come into these rocks, not all of you are coming out. Dozen of us, 2 of you. I like our odds. Your funeral. The attack began with a probing shot that whined off the rocks near Clara's position. Then all hell broke loose. The bounty hunters came from three sides, using cover and coordination that spoke of experience. But Colt and Clara had the high ground and desperation on their side. Clara's first shot took a man out of his saddle. Her second sent another diving for cover. Beside her, Colt's rifle spoke with deadly precision, each shot carefully placed. The attackers quickly learned that rushing the position would be costly. "Fall back!" Garrison shouted as another of his men fell. "Dig in and starve them out!" As the initial assault failed, the bounty hunters settled into a siege. Occasional shots kept Colt and Clara pinned down while the sun climbed higher, turning their rocky fortress into an oven. "They're smart," Colt admitted, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Wait for heat and thirst to do their work. How long can we hold out?" "Day, maybe two. Depends on how patient they are." But even as he spoke, Colt was planning. These rocks had hidden paths, ways out that the attackers might not have covered. As darkness fell, he'd have options. The question was whether Clara would agree to take them, as if reading his thoughts. She said, "Whatever you're thinking about doing alone, forget it. We stay together." Stubborn woman. "You wouldn't love me if I wasn't." Despite everything, the danger, the heat, the certainty of death if they were taken, Colt found himself smiling. "No, I wouldn't." The afternoon wore on in sporadic gunfire and waiting. But Colt noticed something. The shooting from one direction had stopped. Either those men had pulled back, or... "Company coming," Clara said suddenly, pointing east. More riders, but something was different about these. They wore badges that caught the late sun, and their formation was military precise. Federal marshals. Colt breathed. What the hell? The newcomers didn't hesitate. Their leader, a grizzled man with steel-gray hair, called out in a voice that brooked no argument. "This is United States Marshal Tom Bradley. All of you men are ordered to throw down your weapons immediately. Any man who fires another shot will be charged with interfering with federal officers." Confusion rippled through the bounty hunters. Garrison stood up from cover, his face dark with anger. "Marshal, we're pursuing legitimate bounties." "The hell you are." Bradley cut him off. "I've got a telegram here from Judge William Pearson in Denver. Says the woman you're hunting is under federal protection pending investigation into corruption and murder at Wilson's rest station. Any man who harms her will answer to federal law." Colt felt Clara sag against him, relief making her knees weak. "How?" she whispered. "That wire I sent 3 days ago," Colt said, understanding dawning. "The judge must have started investigating immediately." Marshal Bradley rode closer to the rocks. "Colt Harlow, Miss Whitmore, you can come down now. You're under my protection." As they made their way down from the rocks, Clara clutched Colt's hand. "Is it over?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. "The running is," Colt said. "The rest? That's just beginning." But as they reached the federal marshals, as Bradley's men disarmed the grumbling bounty hunters, Colt knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The woman who'd stood in court in shackles had found her strength, and the bounty hunter who'd offered her freedom had found his heart. In the growing dusk of the desert evening, that seemed like enough. The forest was thick with pine and shadow as they made camp for what might be their last night of running. The federal marshals had escorted them to the territorial border, but Marshal Bradley had pulled Colt aside with a warning. "Judge Pearson can give you a hearing, but you'll need evidence. Without it, she'll still hang." Now, 20 miles from Wilson's rest station, the weight of that truth hung between them like smoke from their small fire. Clara sat close to Colt, their shoulders touching, drawing comfort from the contact. "I can't go back there," she said quietly, staring into the flames. "Just thinking about it makes me feel like I'm drowning." "You won't be alone," Colt reminded her, his arm tightening around her. "I'll be right beside you every step. And if we don't find anything, if whoever really killed Brennan covered their tracks, then we keep looking. Someone knows something." Clara, secrets like that don't stay buried forever. She turned to look at him, studying his face in the firelight. Why do you believe in me so much? Even now, after everything we've been through, you've never once doubted my innocence. Colt was quiet for a moment, considering his words. Because I've looked into the eyes of killers. Clara, real ones. Men who take life easy as breathing. You're not one of them. You've got steel in you, sure enough, but not cruelty. Never cruelty. Clara reached up, touching his face with gentle fingers. I don't deserve you? That's where you're wrong. He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. We deserve each other. Two broken souls who found something whole together. The night sounds of the forest surrounded them. An owl calling in the distance. The whisper of wind through pine boughs. The crackle of their fire. It was peaceful, almost dangerously so, lulling them into a sense of safety they couldn't afford. Colt, Clara said suddenly, her voice taking on a different quality. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want tonight. He understood immediately what she was saying, saw it in the way her gray eyes had darkened, the way her breathing had changed. Clara, you don't have to. I'm not offering because I have to, she interrupted. I'm offering because I want to, because if tomorrow goes badly, I want one perfect thing to hold on to, one choice that was completely mine. You're sure? Instead of answering with words, she kissed him. Not the desperate kiss of their first encounter, or the gentle sweetness of their dancing night, but something deeper, something that spoke of decision and desire and trust, hard won. Colt spread his bedroll near the fire, laying his coat over it to make a softer surface. His hands were gentle as they helped her with buttons and laces, patient with the trembling that had nothing to do with cold. When she stood before him in the firelight, vulnerable in ways that went beyond the physical, he thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful. You're shaking, he observed, pulling her close. Not from fear, she whispered against his chest. It's been since before, since I was still myself. I thought I'd forgotten how to want this. We can stop any time, he assured her. Just say the word. No. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes fierce with determination. I want to remember what it feels like to be touched with love instead of ownership. Show me, Colt, remind me. So he did, with infinite patience and tenderness. Every touch was a question, every kiss an affirmation. He helped her reclaim pieces of herself she thought lost forever, replacing cruel memories with gentle ones. When they came together at last, it was with a sweetness that brought tears to her eyes. I love you, she gasped, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. God help me, I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too, he murmured against her hair. More than I thought I could love anything. You're my redemption. Clara, my salvation. They made love slowly, carefully, with the kind of attention that comes from knowing how fragile happiness can be. Every moment was precious, every touch a promise, every whispered word a vow. The forest kept their secrets, and the fire burned low. And for a little while, the world beyond their circle of warmth didn't exist. Afterward, they lay entwined, Clara's head on Colt's chest, listening to his heartbeat. His fingers combed through her hair, and she felt safer than she had in years. Tell me about after, she said drowsily. When this is over and I'm free, tell me about our life. Well, Colt said, his voice rumbling in his chest. First thing, we get married proper. Find a preacher who doesn't ask too many questions about our past. Then we find that ranch I mentioned. Nothing fancy at first. Maybe just a cabin and a few head of cattle. I want a garden, Clara added. Vegetables and flowers, both. And a porch where we can sit in the evenings. Big porch, he agreed. With a swing, and maybe someday, children playing in the yard. Clara's breath caught. Children. If you want, only if you want, I know after everything you've been through. I want, she said firmly. I want everything. The whole life I thought I'd never have. But Colt, what if we can't? What if tomorrow? Then we face it, he said simply. together. That's all we can do." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other in their dreams of a future that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the reality of what they had to do. They broke camp in companionable silence, both aware that by nightfall everything could be different. As they saddled the horses, Clara noticed Colt checking his weapons with more than usual care. "You're expecting trouble," she said. "Always expect trouble around Wilson's place. Man like that doesn't operate without protection." He looked at her seriously. "When we get there, you let me do the talking first. We need information, not a gunfight. And if they won't talk, then we make them want to." The ride to Wilson's rest station took 3 hours through increasingly familiar territory. Every landmark brought back memories Clara would rather forget. The twisted juniper where she'd considered ending it all one desperate night. The creek where she'd washed blood from her hands and face. The ridge where she'd last looked back before fleeing into the unknown. "You all right?" Colt asked, noting her pallor. "No," she said honestly. "But I will be. I have to be." Wilson's rest station looked exactly as she remembered. A sprawling collection of buildings that had grown without plan or purpose, centered around the main tavern and rooms for rent. Even at midday, horses stood at the hitching posts, and the sound of rough laughter carried on the wind. "Remember," Colt said as they dismounted, "we're just travelers looking for a meal and information. Nothing more until we know what we're dealing with." They entered through the main door, and Clara had to fight not to flinch at the familiar smell of stale beer, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. The common room was half full, men hunched over drinks and cards, a few women moving between tables with practiced smiles. The conversation died as they entered. Clara felt eyes on her, some curious, some calculating. Then a woman behind the bar gasped, "Clara, Lord have mercy, is that you?" Clara recognized her. Martha, one of the older women who'd shown her kindness when she could. Martha's face was a mix of joy and fear as she hurried over. "You shouldn't be here," Martha whispered urgently. "They said you were dead, or good as, if anyone tells the new owner." "New owner?" Colt interjected. "What happened to Carl Wilson?" Martha's expression darkened. "Dead these 2 weeks past. Shot on the road. They say his brother Samuel runs the place now, and he's worse than Carl ever was." "Martha," Clara said quietly, "we need to talk, privately. It's important." The older woman glanced around nervously, then nodded. "Kitchen, but quickly." They followed her through to the kitchen where an ancient Chinese man was stirring a pot of stew. He looked up, saw Clara, and his weathered face split into a toothless grin. "Miss Clara, you come back." "Hello, Chen," Clara managed, touched by his obvious joy. "It's good to see you." "Never mind reunions," Martha said urgently. "What are you doing here? Don't you know there's still a price on your head?" "We're trying to clear her name." Colt explained, "We need to know what really happened the night Brennan died." Martha's face closed off. "I don't know nothing about that. Please," Clara said. "I know someone else was there that night. Someone killed him after he attacked me. I need to know who." "Even if I knew, why would I tell?" Martha's voice was bitter. "You got out. You're free. The rest of us are still here, still trapped. You talk, you die. That's the rule." "Not anymore," Colt said. "Wilson's dead. Things are changing. Help us, and maybe we can help you and the others get out too." Martha stared at him for a long moment, then at Clara. Something in her expression shifted. "It was Annie," she said finally, so quiet they almost couldn't hear. "Little Annie from Missouri, Brennan. He'd been after her for weeks. That night, when he couldn't find you, he went for her instead, but she fought back, hit him with the poker when he wouldn't stop." Clara's heart sank. Annie was barely 17, a runaway who'd arrived only months before Clara fled. "Where is she now?" "Dead," Martha said flatly. "Samuel Wilson found out what she'd done, said she'd cost him a valuable customer, made an example of her in front of everyone. That's when we all knew we could never tell the truth about that night. The kitchen door burst open, and a man Clara didn't recognize stood there with a shotgun leveled at them. Well, boys said they saw someone familiar ride in. The murderess returns to the scene of the crime. Easy, Colt said, his hand hovering near his gun. We're just here for the truth. Truth. The man, who had to be Samuel Wilson, laughed ugly. Truth is, this bitch killed a paying customer and cost my brother money. Truth is, there's $5,000 on her head, and I aim to collect— The truth, Clara said, standing straighter, is that Josiah Brennan was a monster who died attacking an innocent girl, and your brother was a monster for killing her to protect his business. Samuel's face darkened. Shut your mouth. Whore. No. Clara stepped forward, ignoring both Colt's warning hand and the shotgun barrel. I'm done being silent, done being afraid. Your brother sold women like cattle. Brennan bought them. They both got what they deserved. Clara, Colt warned, seeing Samuel's finger tighten on the trigger. But Martha moved faster than anyone expected, grabbing a heavy pan from the stove and bringing it down on Samuel's head. He crumpled, the shotgun firing harmlessly into the ceiling. Run, Martha said urgently. Take Chen's written testimony about Annie. He saw it all. Wrote it down in case. It's in his room, under the floorboards. Go! But Clara hesitated. Come with us, all of you. And go where? We're whores and cast-offs. At least here we eat regular. Martha's smile was sad but resolved. But you've got a chance. Take it. Live free for all of us who can't. Chen pressed a folded paper into Clara's hands, chattering rapidly in Chinese. Clara didn't understand the words, but she understood the blessing in them. We need to go, Colt said urgently as shouts came from the common room. Now! They ran, Clara clutching the precious testimony, Colt covering their retreat. They reached their horses as men poured from the building, but Colt's warning shots kept them back long enough to mount and ride. As they galloped away from Wilson's rest station for what Clara swore would be the last time, she felt something lift from her shoulders. Not just the fear of that place, but the guilt of leaving the others behind. She had their truth now, Annie's truth. Maybe it would be enough. You all right? Colt called over the thunder of hooves. Yes, Clara called back, and for the first time in years, she meant it. I'm finally all right. They had evidence. They had hope. And most importantly, they had each other. Whatever came next at Judge Pearson's court, Clara knew she could face it. The woman who'd stood in shackles was gone, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who'd found love in the most unlikely place and learned that, sometimes, redemption comes from the most unexpected sources. As Wilson's rest station disappeared behind them, Clara didn't look back. She was done with the past. The future waited, uncertain but bright with possibility, and she rode toward it with the man who'd given her back her life. Denver sprawled before them like a promise of civilization after weeks in the wilderness. The city had grown since Colt last saw it. New buildings rising against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. Streets bustling with commerce and life. Clara sat straighter in her saddle, unconsciously smoothing her travel-worn dress. Nervous? Colt asked. Terrified, she admitted. What if the judge doesn't believe us? What if Chen's testimony isn't enough? Then we'll find another way. He reached over, taking her hand. But Clara, we've got the truth on our side now. That counts for something. Judge William Pearson's residence was a modest two-story house on a quiet street, far from the grandeur Clara had expected. A servant answered their knock, eyeing their trail dust with disapproval before showing them to a study lined with law books. The judge himself was younger than Clara had imagined, perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He rose as they entered, extending his hand to Colt. Mr. Harlow, and you must be Miss Whitmore. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct but not unkind. Please sit. We have much to discuss. For the next hour, Clara told her story again, this time with Chen's written testimony spread on the judge's desk. The old cook had been meticulous, documenting not just Annie's death, but the systematic abuse at Wilson's rest station, complete with dates, names, and detailed observations. Judge Pearson read in silence, occasionally asking for clarification. When he finished, he removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. "This is damning," he said finally. "Not just for the Wilsons, but for the entire system that allowed such a place to operate. Miss Whitmore, I must ask, why didn't you present this at your original trial?" "I didn't have it then," Clara said simply. "And even if I had, would Judge Harlan have cared? A Chinese cook's word against respectable businessmen? A valid point." Pearson stood, pacing to the window. "I've already begun investigating Judge Harlan's connections to the Wilson brothers. It seems they were quite generous in their campaign contributions." "So what happens now?" Colt asked. "Now, I convene a new trial, a real one, with a jury that hasn't been bought and witnesses who aren't afraid to speak." The judge turned back to them. "It won't be easy. There will be those who prefer the original verdict to stand, who don't want their comfortable assumptions challenged. Are you prepared for that, Miss Whitmore?" "I've been preparing my whole life," Clara said quietly. "I'm ready to stop running." The new trial was set for the following week. Colt secured rooms at a respectable boarding house, and for the first time in memory, Clara slept in a real bed with clean sheets and no fear of who might come through the door. The morning of the trial dawned clear and cold. Clara dressed carefully in a simple gray dress that Martha had pressed into her hands during their escape. Something respectable, the older woman had said, for when you get your justice. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread about the woman who'd escaped the noose and returned to clear her name. Some came for the spectacle, others out of genuine curiosity about the truth. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Pearson." The bailiff called. As Clara stood, she felt Colt's hand briefly squeeze hers. Across the courtroom, she saw faces she recognized. Marshal Bradley, looking official and stern. Surprisingly, Martha from Wilson's, who must have made the journey after all. And in the back, a small group of women Clara remembered from her time at the station. They'd come to bear witness. The prosecutor, a different man this time, one with a reputation for fairness, presented the case methodically. Chen's testimony was read into the record, translated by a court interpreter. Martha took the stand, her voice shaking but determined as she described the night in question and Annie's subsequent murder. "The defense would like to call Miss Clara Whitmore," her lawyer announced. Clara's legs felt weak as she approached the witness stand, but she kept her head high as she swore to tell the truth. She looked out at the packed courtroom and saw something she hadn't expected, understanding in some faces, even sympathy. She told her story one more time, but this time was different. This time, people listened. When she described her husband's betrayal, several women in the gallery wiped their eyes. When she detailed Brennan's attack, men who'd probably visited similar establishments shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Miss Whitmore," the prosecutor said gently, "why did you run that night?" "Because I knew no one would believe me," Clara said simply. "A woman like me against a man like Brennan. I'd seen what happened to girls who complained. They disappeared, or worse. So yes, I ran, but I didn't kill him." The defense presented their case over 2 days, systematically dismantling the original prosecution. They showed Brennan's history of violence, the corruption in Redemption Creek's justice system, the financial ties between the Wilsons and various officials. On the 3rd day, Judge Pearson allowed something unprecedented testimony from the women who'd traveled from Wilson's rest station. One by one, they took the stand, voices growing stronger as they spoke truths that had been buried under threat and fear for too long. "Brennan was a devil," one said flatly. "We all knew to hide when he came around. That night, he was worse than usual, mad drunk and mean with it. Annie was a good girl," another testified, "just trying to survive like the rest of us. When Brennan couldn't find Clara, he went for Annie. We heard her screaming. Carl Wilson knew the truth. Martha said, back on the stand. We all knew, but he said Clara was as good as guilty anyway. Might as well let her hang for it. Said it would be a lesson to the rest of us. When the testimony concluded, Judge Pearson called for closing arguments. Clara barely heard them, her mind spinning with the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. Colt's hand found hers, anchoring her to the present. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Judge Pearson said finally, you have heard evidence of a grave miscarriage of justice. You have heard how corruption and greed conspired to condemn an innocent woman while protecting the guilty. Your duty now is to correct that injustice. The jury retired to deliberate. Clara and Colt waited in an anteroom, the minutes stretching like hours. She paced, unable to sit still, while he watched her with steady patience. However this goes, she began. It's going to be fine, he interrupted. Have faith. I'm trying. It's just... The door opened. Jury's back, the bailiff announced. They filed back into the courtroom, Clara's heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The jury foreman stood, a weathered rancher who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Clara sagged against Colt, tears streaming down her face. Through the chaos, she heard the foreman continue. On the charge of horse theft, we find the defendant not guilty. Order. Judge Pearson banged his gavel. I will have order. Miss Whitmore, please rise. Clara stood on shaking legs, Colt supporting her. Miss Whitmore, this court owes you an apology. You have been grievously wronged by a system that should have protected you. While I cannot undo the past, I can ensure that your record is cleared completely. You are free to go, with the court's deepest regrets for your suffering. Furthermore, the judge continued, his voice carrying over the noise, this court recommends immediate investigation into the operations at Wilson's Rest Station and all associated parties. No woman should suffer what you and others have endured. As they left the courthouse, Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Women pressed her hands, men tipped their hats, and reporters shouted questions. But all she could focus on was Colt's proud smile and the feeling of sun on her face as a free woman. That evening, in the quiet of their boarding house room, Clara finally let herself fully feel the reality of it. It's over, she whispered. It's really over. No, Colt corrected, pulling her into his arms. It's just beginning. Our life. Clara, the one we talked about. Ranch, garden, porch swing, everything. You still want that, even after all this? Especially after all this. He kissed her softly. Marry me, tomorrow, next week, whenever you want. But marry me. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, to all of it. 3 days later, they stood before a minister in a small church on the edge of town. Marshal Bradley served as witness, along with Martha and several of the women from Wilson's. Clara wore a simple white dress that the boarding house owner's wife had insisted on lending her, and Colt had somehow found a suit that almost fit. Do you, Clara, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? The minister asked. I do, Clara said, her voice strong and clear. Do you, Colt, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Colt replied, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. As Colt kissed his bride, the small gathering erupted in cheers. Clara thought her heart might burst from happiness. The reception was held at the boarding house, a simple affair with cake and lemonade. Martha pulled Clara aside, pressing an envelope into her hands. Wedding gift from the girls, she said. We all chipped in. It's not much, but we wanted you to have something for your new start. Clara hugged her tightly. What about you? You could still come with us? Martha smiled. Maybe someday. For now, some of us are going to try to make something better of that place. Turn it into a real boarding house. Maybe a place where women can be safe. As the sun set over Denver, Mr. and Mrs. Harlow said their goodbyes. They had a wagon loaded with supplies, a deed to a small ranch 40 miles north, and plans to build something good and clean in theirs. "Ready?" Colt asked, helping Clara onto the wagon seat. "Ready," she confirmed, taking the reins with confident hands. As they drove out of Denver, Clara looked back once at the city that had given her justice, then forward to the mountains that promised a future. The woman who'd stood in Shackles was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who'd learned that love could conquer fear and truth could defeat lies. "No more looking back," she said. "No more looking back." Colt agreed, his arm around her shoulders. The wagon rolled on into the gathering dusk, carrying them toward their new life. Behind them lay pain and suffering and injustice. Ahead lay possibility and hope and the chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of the past. Clara Whitmore was dead. Clara Harlow was just beginning to live. Thank you for listening to this tale of love, redemption, and justice in the Old West. Where are you enjoying this story from today? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Leave a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed Clara and Colt's journey, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of courage and romance on the frontier. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one.